NC pork, good for the plate, great for the state. Here we are, it's college basketball season 2026, and what better way to start it off than a special edition of Time Out, the Tobacco Road basketball show, and our special guest today, the one, the only, our lead analyst on everything here on the North Carolina Sports Network, David Glenn. DG, happy 2026 to you.
Hey, right back at you, Mike. I am jacked up about what has become my favorite sport as a longtime North Carolinian, and it's great to be back with you here in 2026.
So we want to use this edition of the show to kind of tell your story again for folks if they haven't heard it before or if they haven't heard some of the stories that we'll explore today, and just let them know about who David Glenn is and what you bring to the table as a true sports journalist here in the bold North State. So let's strip away the awards, the platforms, the titles, and just go back to when North Carolinians didn't know the name David Glenn. What pulled you towards sports and sports storytelling instead of just being another fan in the stands when you were coming out of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, Mike, I'm the kind of guy that might not have had a very thoughtful answer to that question had I not been asked it by others at times. And it forces me to think and reflect a little bit. And I think part of my bottom line now that I've had some time to think about it is that I've loved reading and I have loved sports and I have loved just the power of words and ideas for as long as I can remember. I mean, I was truly 4 years old and in love with playing and watching sports growing up in Philadelphia that many years ago. And of course, I grew up, as you did, in a world without an internet. And I grew up, in my case, in a city, Philadelphia, where I would describe sports as a central part of the culture. So as a little one, I was reading a lot of books, some of them sports books. I was reading the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper every single day, always the sports section, often other parts. And I just became fascinated with the power of words and ideas, even though my test scores a little later in life suggested that I might have had, more of a mathematical brain. But by the time I was a teenager in the Philadelphia area, I was also playing all sorts of sports. I mean, primarily baseball, left-handed pitcher, but also football and basketball and hockey and tennis and even other things. So at the time, I was even learning some of the ins and outs and strategies and nuances of all those various sports as a participant, while continuing to be an avid reader about sports and other things and an avid sports TV viewer of the Philadelphia Phillies and the Philadelphia Eagles and the other teams that were such a huge part of my childhood. I also grew up listening to sports radio. And at the time, there were not a lot of 24-hour sports radio stations, but WIP in Philadelphia was one of them. I would listen to it almost every day going to and from high school, and I continued to just read and kind of saturate myself with sports. By the time I'm heading to college, I knew I was not good enough, not even as a pretty good left-handed pitcher who did pitch into my early 20s. I knew I was not going to be an athlete as a way of remaining a part of the sports world. So I started looking for other ways that I could remain a part of that world. That's when I started taking writing a little bit more seriously. I started dabbling in broadcasting just a little bit, but at a very primitive level. Once I decided I wanted to be a sports writer, that's when I decided to transfer to the University of North Carolina. At the time, they had the #1 journalism school in the entire country. It got me a little closer to home in my family being in Pennsylvania then and now. During my time in Chapel Hill, I became the sports editor of the student newspaper. I worked part-time, a lot of hours at the Durham Herald-Sun newspaper. I started freelancing for the New York Times and the Washington Post and other national newspapers. And I even contributed to a little newsletter that later I purchased and turned into the ACC Sports Journal. So at that point, my sports writing career was off and running before I was even 21 years old. And I absolutely loved it enough to know that I wanted that to be a part of my long-term future. although I had no idea at the time, at that early age, that I would end up doing a bunch of TV and our YouTube channel now, and obviously a lot of sports radio in those decades in between. So I didn't foresee every aspect of this story, but that love of words and that love of sports and the desire to stay around both was a big part of it.
You mentioned the ACC Sports Journal, not by name, but that's what you referred to. But man, there are a lot of us that still remember that as the poop sheet. And it was founded, I guess, originally by former North Carolina men's basketball standout Dennis Weisick. What was it like taking over that particular publication? Because growing up in the ACC region, especially here in the bold North State back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, man, it was absolutely appointment material to go to the mailbox and pick up your weekly edition of the poop sheet. I mean, you got a chance to take that over. Did you have any sense when you did take it over? You've been in the market for a while then, but how much of an impact that publication had on an entire generation of basketball fans here in North Carolina?
Yeah, the ACC Sports Journal, again, was a magazine that I turned into a magazine from its predecessor, which was that newsletter that was affectionately known as the Poop Sheet. And at the same time, I was building my more traditional sports writing career. I was a freelance contributor to the old Poop Sheet. And I liked several things about it. Mainstream media was mostly ignoring recruiting coverage. Some even looked down upon recruiting coverage like it was some amateur, beneath us type of thing in the newspaper world. So I liked that. It was a little renegade along those lines. And then it allowed for really knowledgeable writers to just cut open your veins and bleed about the stuff that you knew behind the scenes, even when it was not a traditional fit for the way sports was covered in the traditional way. So I was fascinated by the concept. I loved being a contributor, just a freelance contributor. It wasn't until much later, I was actually graduating from law school in 1994, and I was asked if I was interested in purchasing it. Or at that time, I was asked if I was interested in running it, not yet buying it. And I basically said, number one, as much as I love the old name, I'm only going to run it if we change the name. I'm only going to run it if we continue this editorial approach, which was part renegade, but I thought it was extremely responsible. And most importantly, it served the reader really well. Millions of people over time knew things they would not have otherwise known except for the ACC Sports Journal. It became the Bible of the Atlantic Coast Conference, and others tried to mimic it with massive corporate backing, and they all failed. And yet we continued to thrive, and there were a lot of reasons for that. So I was enamored with the idea. Of course, they did change the name. That's why I accepted the job as the editor after being just a freelance contributor. And we built it into a monster. I said, I don't want this thing to just be a little newsletter that you pick up only in Chapel Hill and Durham and Raleigh. We're going to get in bookstores. We're going to be up and down the East Coast. This is an expanding conference, and I want people in any part of the United States that they care about the Atlantic Coast Conference. I want them to be able to get it, at their Barnes and Noble or their Borders books in the old days. So we modernized it. We took it to a level that at one point, Mike, we were the best-selling college sports magazine in the history of our country. And that was an incredible accomplishment that I'm very proud of to this day. But we maintained a lot of that editorial approach all the way up until the point that I sold it. We were different than what you got in the mainstream media, but I thought we were very professionally responsible along the way. And there are many people who describe the old Poop Sheet or the decades of the ACC Sports Journal just the way you did, with a reverence and an appreciation that no matter what else I do in my career, that'll be on the short list of the things that I'm most proud of.
You have a lot to be proud of over the course of your career so far. And a few moments ago, you just casually glanced over something that most people would consider to be the crowning achievement of their life, and that's graduating from law school. And then you later on practiced law for years here in North Carolina while building your media career What is the reason that you were able to make both of those work in concert with your career in sports and in law?
There is some overlap, and I'll give you the most important overlap in a second. But I would say that I truly loved practicing law. I loved helping people. I did a lot of contract law where you're just helping people make sure they understand what they're signing. Usually, the powerful people write the contracts and often hope you don't understand what you're signing. So, I've always liked helping the vulnerable. I've always liked fighting the more powerful, especially dishonest ones. So, I was passionate about being an attorney, just as I was passionate about being a sports writer and sports broadcaster. But I did love the sports stuff even more in the long run. And after about 20 years of either being in law school or practicing as an attorney, I eventually stopped practicing. I might go back, but I just fell in love with sports to a degree that, along with the fact that my broadcasting and writing careers took off to such a degree that there was no more financial pressure for me to be an attorney as well. In those early years, I needed both paychecks. But the most important overlap is really that it's appreciating the value of evidence in a really powerful way. The importance of evidence and of following the evidence wherever it takes you. Something isn't true because you hope it's true. It's not true because it makes you feel better. It's not true because it reinforces your pre-existing beliefs. It's not true because it falls in line with some other partisan narrative or some belief that may have been passed down to you or me from our ancestors. The truth requires evidence, and that is emphasized in journalism school, and it is doubly, triply, quadruply emphasized in law school. And you must be willing to follow the evidence wherever it takes you. You can't just leave some evidence out because it challenges your preconceptions and makes you uncomfortable. You have to respect the scientific method. You have to learn and value what some people call critical thinking skills. And my bottom line is if you don't learn and embrace those principles that I just described, there is absolutely no way you can be an effective attorney. And there is absolutely no way you can be a reliable journalist. And in my opinion, there's no way you can even be a functional contributing member of society without critical thinking skills and an appreciation for following the evidence. I don't think you can be a good parent, a good neighbor, a good friend, a good citizen. I think those things are that important. And so I learned it at the number one journalism school in the country. I learned it at a top 25 law school. I practiced it for 2 decades as an attorney, and I've practiced it for 4 decades as a journalist. So I do think I had a good idea or sense of the framework of all these things even before law school. But law school and my legal practice just really helped it become an even more sturdy part of the foundation for how I approached practicing law, the foundation for how I still approach sports journalism, and maybe even more broadly, the foundation for how I approach life and just trying to be a good citizen of the United States and of the world.
Every great team has a winning playbook, and every great meal, it starts with North Carolina pork. Bacon for the early tip breakfast, pulled pork at the arena. That's how you win the day. Behind every bite, NC pig farmers fuel more than $10 billion in economic impact statewide. Great teams execute. Great meals deliver. North Carolina pork. Game on, grill on. Learn more at ncpork.org.
Hey Wolfpack Nation, you already know that when we talk about the great traditions of NC State athletics, Amedio's Italian restaurant is right at the heart of it. Since 1963, it's been the go-to spot for generations of Pack fans. The walls tell the story, the food seals the deal, and every visit feels like part of the family. Whether it's pre-game pasta, post-game celebrations, or just a night out on Western Boulevard, Amedio's delivers every single time. Great people, great plates, and pure NC State pride. Stop by Amedio's, a true Wolfpack original.
Let's go back to 1996 and then fast forward to 2026. Over that 30-year span, how have you seen sports journalism evolve, devolve over this period of time?
Ooh, and you're going all the way up until now?
I'm going the last 30 years because you and I met in 1991. And so I'm going to just take the first
Yeah.
5 years of our knowing each other out of the equation and just look into 1996.
Oof.
Randolph Childress, to put it into perspective, is filling up hoops in Greensboro at the ACC tournament, along with Tim Duncan and greatest Guilford College alumni ever as a basketball coach, the one, the only G. David Odom. But when you look at 1996 until
Yeah.
2026, it's 30 years.
Yeah.
Man, it's really changed since you and I were coming out. And I tried not to say it like that because I sound
Yeah.
like I'm old, but there's been a lot of change.
Yeah. I'd say there are two elements to that evolution. One was, of course, not just the birth of the internet, but the explosion of the internet.
Right.
So, in a very practical way, we had to take the incredibly popular award winning work that we were doing with the ACC Sports Journal in the 1990s, and we had to convert it to the internet age. By the end of the 90s, when the internet had really exploded, and then obviously in the 2000s. I did not find that adjustment to what you and I remember as the old world. I didn't find that as an inherently negative thing. I just saw it as, hey, people are consuming in a much quicker way. They tend to like, even back then, shorter stories more frequently rather than longer stories less frequently. And you had to cater to that. You had to populate a website on an hour by hour basis rather than publishing, let's say, an every 2 week magazine, et cetera. So that initial evolution was simply a repackaging and a reimagining of really high caliber content for basically the same audience, just consuming it in a different way, electronically rather than in the old way. The more scary evolution of these last 30 plus years has been, I'd say, the last decade, really probably even 2 decades. It's the 24-hour outrage cycle. It's a focus, not always, but more often the focus in the media, including the sports media, more often on being provocative, and it's more often as part of a business model about maximizing engagement. And sometimes that can be done in dishonest ways. Sometimes it can be done in ways that require extreme exaggeration, hyperbole, being provocative simply for the sake of being provocative, rather than just having a genuine provocative opinion that might generate engagement and feedback and sometimes anger. This is far worse a development in news than it is in the sports world. But in the 21st century, especially, many people figured out, and I'm being dead serious when I say this, many people figured out that lying on purpose could be a very effective business model as long as it maximized engagement and as long as it built a large enough, loyal enough audience. That was not being taught in journalism school back in the 1980s and 1990s, I can promise you. The idea of lying to people on purpose as a business model was not really in the conversation, at least not the ones that I was a part of. But now it's a thing. And there are conspiracy theorists and nut jobs and QAnon lunatics who make tons of money by lying to people, exaggerating things, and building a large enough audience or a large enough engagement that it makes them money, even if in many cases they know they're lying to their audience. They know their audience is gullible. They know their audience is uninformed, but they know they've developed some loyalty and they're going to keep riding that money for it, riding that wave for as long as they can cash those checks. To a lesser degree, this has impacted the sports journalism as well. And I do want to emphasize there is still good sports journalism out there. It's just a much smaller slice of the pie. And that pie, that content pie, if you will, is now sliced into countless pieces compared to what it was before. I mean, it's not just 24-hour sports radio stations in much greater numbers than back in the day. It's satellite radio, it's podcasts, it's on-demand video, on-demand audio, in addition to newspapers and their websites, TV stations and their websites, and all the rest of that information ecosystem. So in some ways, it's changed in kind of a natural evolution, just as it has for centuries. In these other ways, I think it's a much more alarming trend, and those alarm bells do apply to the sports part of that information ecosystem as well.
It really does go back to the point of, one of the things, David, that I was thinking about as I was putting these questions together on this topic was just how back in the early 90s, I remember when ESPN came on the air and they were doing different camera angles, maybe dressing a little bit differently on the air. The tone of their programming was a little bit different than the mothership at ESPN. And some people didn't like that. And now fast forward to 2026, and it's like the premier show back in the day for me on ESPN was the Sports Reporters with Dick Schaap and Conlon and Ryan and Lupica and other guys that would come in, or gals, from time to time and be on that. But they were always going to tackle the issues head on and really said some provocative things. Now you fast forward to now, to where ESPN pretty much across the board is all about personalities and getting that hot take and not really about telling the story. It used to be that appointment viewing on Sunday morning was the Sports Reporters, and now Jeremy Schaap is carrying on Dick Schaap's legacy, but it's on an internet-only platform that rarely does anybody really ever click over to it. You've got to look for it to find it, because that's not the thing now. We're not looking for that deeper story from that national level. So why is it important to continue telling real stories with real facts in real time here in 2026? Why is that important?
Because I think it brings value. And I have nothing against wildly entertaining things. I'm a fundamentally to each his own, to each her own person. As long as you're not hurting people, let folks gobble up whatever news or alternative information they're interested in, as long as it's not hurting others or creating some kind of a nonsense parallel universe that I think does happen in our society at times. To each his own, to each her own otherwise. But I know that there's still an audience for folks who still love the value of thoughtful analysis, understanding a sport, understanding an element of sports business or sports law or behind the scenes coverage or growing trends, rising coaching salaries, or is there going to be a boom or bust aspect of college athletics, or is Congress going to get involved? Understanding why teams are winning and losing, telling human stories about how this player got better or how this team contributes in the community, even off the court or off the field. There's still a lot of value in those things, and there's still an audience for those things. And it's important to me as a human being to just, we used to do a lot of market research, Mike, on either my radio show or the magazine or other things. A lot of times people would, they would write really harsh things, not very complimentary. Sometimes you would learn from them. Sometimes they were just kind of lazy, ignorant, cheap shots. But I've always sought out fair-minded people. The fair-minded people are the ones who help us become better versions of ourselves. And even if they're critical, if they're fair-minded and they're critical, we probably can learn from them. If they're not fair-minded and they're critical, they're probably worth ignoring. But in that market research, we often heard, I'm a smarter person for having read ACC Sports Journal. I'm a better person for having listened to the David Glenn Show. If I was in an argument, I'd want that guy on my side. If I wanted to understand a topic, I'd want that guy doing the research. So when you get enough of that feedback, positive and negative, most of our market research was positive, but I would read all the negative, and it was not hard to tell who was a fair-minded critic and who was a lunatic fringe critic. But you learn from the reasonable people, but you also listen to those who are complimenting you. And whether it's 2026 or 1996, people love a good story. People love intellectual approaches to good stories. If you can be entertaining along the way, that's great as well. Everybody in our business, to some degree, better be either informative or entertaining, and preferably both. And I'm one of those people that no matter what any feedback is, it is fundamentally important to me as a professional, fundamentally important to me as a human being, that I am accurate and fair. When you're accurate and fair, whatever criticism comes your way, a phone call from a coach who didn't like something you said or wrote, an athletic director, a commissioner, a university president, my goal, and I'm passionate about it, like I lose sleep about the possibility that I might be writing or saying something unfair, even to somebody I might not like. I want to be absolutely accurate and absolutely fair. As human beings, we don't always bat 100% on those things, but I'm proud of a track record that suggests my percentage is really, 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 really high. And when I have received those criticisms or caught those phone calls, I look back. If I was inaccurate or unfair, I apologize. And if I was not inaccurate or unfair, I say, it is not my job to make you happy. It is my job to write the truth. It's not my job for you as a fan to feel better about your school or your favorite team. Sometimes your team is not very good. Sometimes your coach is not very good. I don't pull punches. The truth is what the truth is. I don't apologize for writing it or saying it when it's negative. I enjoy writing it and saying it when it's positive. But no matter what team or school or whatever, I've written or said something positive about that team, that coach, that player, that university, and I have written or said something negative about any or all of those same things. The ridiculous fans hear something negative and say, oh, he hates my school. They hear something positive and they say, oh, he must love that school. Well, if you follow me for 40 years, you know I just call it like I see it. And I always come armed with information to back up my opinion. And the starting point is always an absolute pursuit of accuracy and fairness. And again, occasionally we all make mistakes, but overwhelmingly, and I mean 99% of the time, I have a pretty good track record for accuracy and fairness. And I don't apologize when that accurate, fair coverage includes some negative things. The world's filled with people who are going to tell you what you want to hear. And many of them damage you in ways that you don't even know you're being damaged or radicalized or turned into the lunatic fringe. You want to come to me? You're going to get it fairly and accurately as I see it, as someone who's really passionate about understanding what I'm covering and communicating it in an intelligent, fair, accurate way. It's not my job to make people feel better about the truth. It's my job to tell the truth. And knock on wood, that has rewarded me incredibly for 40 years at this point, financially and professionally, and just in terms of the peace of mind that I have knowing that that has been my approach to this job.
You know, going back almost 3 years ago when you and I were meeting at your home in North Raleigh and we're talking about forming the North Carolina Sports Network, those two buzzwords, accuracy and fairness, were at the absolute epicenter of how we wanted to create this new endeavor. And that's great because we have the perspective as all of the things that we have done together to be able to craft something like that and hopefully put it in motion. And that's what people are enjoying here today with the North Carolina Sports Network. But going back to when you were first starting out, who were the mentors or media figures that shaped how you thought about this profession and have molded you into the pro that you are today?
Yeah, there's probably two layers to that, Mike, because there were those I just admired from afar who I might have met in person somewhere along the way. But Bob Costas, for example, I thought was a highly intelligent broadcaster, an ultimate professional as a broadcaster, incredibly well prepared, hardworking, introspective, understanding of whatever topic he was covering, and always just an excellent verbal communicator. I did get to meet him later, but it's not like somebody that I knew personally. A guy like Bryant Gumbel and what he did with the HBO Real Sports enterprise for decades. I thought that was deep dive, brilliant, thoroughly researched, thoughtful, peel the onion style sports journalism. And that had an impact on me. Guys like Barry Jacobs with his ACC Basketball Handbook or Carlton Tudor at the Raleigh News and Observer. Again, I met these people along the way, but I was not interacting with them personally as a young man. The more personal mentors, the ones that I was actually engaging with and interacting with, and I mean at like 19, 20, 21, 22 years old, they included guys like Art Chansky, Ron Morris, Mick Mixon, a guy named Rick Walensik, even my late friend Brick Edinger, who was the chief recruiting writer for the ACC Sports Journal, and prior to that, the poop sheet for his entire adult life, essentially. He was a mentor to me in some ways, but Ron Morris was the sports editor of the Durham Herald-Sun. Rick Walensik was an executive with Raycom Sports, which you remember would have the broadcasting rights to many ACC football and men's basketball games. Mick Mixon is a friend of mine to this day, but was one of those guys who was not that much older than I, but he was a tell it to you straight kind of guy that helped me become a better version of myself as a young broadcaster. And a guy like Art Chansky was similar to that. I'm originally from Philly. Art is originally from the Boston area. We are both very blunt, direct communicators. And sometimes that stubs toes and hurts feelings. But I learned a lot from Art as a young writer. He ran Four Corners Press. He ran the old poop sheet for a long time. He was the editor, sports editor of the Durham Herald-Sun for a while, ran Carolina Court magazine, which was a wonderful annual publication to which I became a contributor. Art Chance was just kind of a combination of fearless and tough and unapologetic about telling you the truth, but he was also extremely fair, extremely knowledgeable, did his homework, highly professional. And Ron Morris was that way as well. And guys like Art Chansky and Ron Morris and Rick Walensik and Mick Mixon, they were the example in my life that I try to be in interns' lives, people that I had at the David Glenn Show or at the ACC Sports Journal, some of whom are my great friends to this day. More recently, as an adjunct professor at UNC Wilmington, if I see greatness or potential greatness in a young person, I emphasize it. And those same young people will tell you, I don't hesitate to criticize either. I am not somebody who lives in this Pollyannish world where I just toss bouquets to everybody because it makes everybody feel better. I try to balance honest criticism with candid praise. And when you're a little more selective with your praise, I think it impacts people more. And I have already been around long enough to know that some of my interns have said to me things like I would say to an Art Chansky, a Ron Morris, a Mick Mixon, or Rick Walensik. They saw something in me at 20 years old in some cases that I had not yet seen in myself. And I've always been a fairly confident guy, but when you hear an accomplished person in an industry you're pursuing single you out, sometimes as a stranger, writing to you as the sports editor of the student newspaper and saying, I don't know you, but I run the Durham Herald-Sun sports section, and what you wrote was professional level stuff. And again, all these folks balanced their compliments with their criticism, but there's something magical about an elder who's more experienced and been around the block in ways that you have not yet, and they see something in you. Again, I was a probably too confident guy at 20 and 22, et cetera, but you do need at some point reassurance and constructive criticism from people who have been there, done that at higher levels than you have. And those guys that I mentioned offered in various ways, some very gentle, all very supportive, but some a little harsher. My Philly roots give me thick skin for the most part. And especially when I know somebody has my best interests at heart, I think it's an incredible gift for them to give me that balance of praise and criticism that I got from some of those folks that I mentioned.
Man, you bring up some great names right there. And here in North Carolina, I think about guys like Wilt Browning from Greensboro, Lennox Rawlings from Winston-Salem.
Ron Green Sr. and Jr.
Going there next. Ron Green Sr. and Jr. there in Charlotte at the Observer. I think about guys like Keith Jarrett up in Asheville, where I spent a lot of time in the western part of the state. Just people that really did it the right way. But you're right. We talk sometimes, and you and I,
Bill
oh,
Brill, by the way. And
Bill,
Mike, let me squeeze this in real quick. One of the most joyful stretches of my entire career came when I got to not just contribute, but run the ACC Sports Journal. I got to hire the writers at every school. I was in charge editorially. What's the smartest thing for any leader to do? Sign good players, hire good assistant coaches. In my case, hire incredibly knowledgeable writers. Man, back then the magazine was every 2 weeks. I couldn't wait to read as the editor what these contributors from 9, later 12, later 15 schools, now 18, what they would write, because I went out of my way to figure out who's the most knowledgeable writer at this school. And that was my primary writer at 9 or 12 or 15 different ACC schools. And so I was their editor in a sense, but most of my work was done by simply selecting the right people. And man, I'm getting to read everything hours, days before my readers get to read whatever ends up in the magazine or at our website. What a joyous time, man, because some of those same people, Bill Brill, Doug Dowdy, a legendary writer from Virginia, Bob Thomas, a legendary writer in Florida, and so many in between, they would tell me that their 2 decades contributing to me, I'm their editor. In many cases, they're the legend, and I'm just the young up-and-coming guy, but I'm their editor, technically their boss. And they would tell me that the ACC Sports Journal, under our direction, was some of the best sports journalism they had ever contributed to in their lives, such that they, as contributors, looked forward to getting the magazine themselves so that they could read what the writers from all other parts of the East Coast at the time were writing. I mean, you want to talk about knowing that you are in the center of a magical universe. That is part of the world I lived, even while practicing as an attorney, even while launching a sports radio career, man. It doesn't get much better than that, because I didn't need awards. I didn't need anybody to tell me how good it was. I knew whom we had on our staff, and I knew that the quality of our product was as good as anything in the world. I don't need a Pulitzer Prize. I don't need a trophy on my desk. We were doing sports journalism at a level exceeded by no one. Not the New York Times, not the Washington Post, not the LA Times. Nowadays, I think The Athletic does a brilliant job of thoughtful sports journalism. We were that for 20 years. And I was sort of the band director, the leader of that parade. And no matter what else I do between the now and the day I die, that will be part of one of the most great, unforgettable, amazing, magical chapters of my professional career.
you talk about things back then, but what about right now? Where does David Glenn go to be entertained or to be informed in the sports journalism world?
I love The Athletic. I was honored to be asked to write for that publication not too long ago. And prior to our launching the North Carolina Sports Network, I had a little more freedom to do freelance stuff. You and I have taken on a yeoman's effort here. So I'm happy to be solidifying what we do together and cutting back on my freelance gigs. But they do, on a national and international scale, what I think you and I and our team do on a statewide and beyond scale. Focus on North Carolina, our case, but also the ACC, and we certainly trickle beyond the borders of what you love to call the bold North State. So The Athletic does thoughtful journalism. I cover things that we cover here at the North Carolina Sports Network, but I am a fan in other areas, right? So if I want to learn about hockey, I like what The Athletic writes about the NHL. I like what Joe Person does for The Athletic on the NFL and the Carolina Panthers. Beyond that, I like what guys like Jay Billis or Mike DeCourcy do. College basketball is one of my areas of expertise, but I still learn and am open-minded to learn from, even as an expert on college basketball. Mike DeCourcy, who lives, breathes, dissects. I mean, that guy's college basketball through and through. On the college football side, I got to become friends with Tony Barnhart, like the guy they call literally his nickname is Mr. College Football, right? Jay Billis, he and I have that lawyer's mind and both have practiced law, but I admire his preparation. I admire his intellect. I admire his analytical skills, his background as a former player, his sense of humor I enjoy, et cetera. And some of these guys have become professional friends over the years, who have spoken to my journalism school classes or, I've gone out to dinner with or met their spouses, et cetera. But yeah, there's a much longer list than that. People that I just enjoy consuming. Sometimes they're writing, sometimes they're broadcasting, sometimes both. But those are some of the names that come to mind off the top of my head.
Skip the traffic and ride straight to the hardwood with NC by Train. It's basketball season in the Triangle, and whether you're heading to see the Wolfpack, Blue Devils, or Tar Heels, you can leave the parking headaches behind. Enjoy comfortable seats, easy boarding, and fast, reliable service that gets you close to campus for every tip-off. Rivalry nights, conference showdowns, and all the magic of college hoops. NC by Train, the smarter, smoother way to get to the big games. Book your trip now at ncbytrain.org. Make it train.
The perfect Wolfpack pregame or postgame spot this season is Sammy's Tap and Grill in West Raleigh. Just minutes from NC State, Sammy's brings more than 65 TVs, a huge menu, 44 draft beers, and an atmosphere built for Wolfpack fans. Burgers, jumbo wings, cold drafts, and all the energy of the pack. Whether you're watching the kickoff, tip-off, face-off, or just gathering with friends, that's where you want to be. Swing by 2235 Avent Ferry Road, Raleigh, and make Sammy's Tap and Grill your Wolfpack game day headquarters. Sammy's, presenting partner of the This Was Then podcast and complete coverage of the NC State Wolfpack on the North Carolina Sports Network.
This is Time Out, the Tobacco Road basketball show on the North Carolina Sports Network, a special edition focusing on my partner here at NCSN, David Glenn. And DG, you haven't just covered the ACC, you have grown alongside it over the almost last 40 years. That's crazy to say that kind of number, but it really has gone by in a snap. But dynasties have come, downfalls, reinvention, college sports always reinventing itself, and every journalist has that one story that they really have enjoyed telling, maybe ongoing for a number of years, but they also have that one that got away, that call not return, the truth that stayed just out of reach. Which one of those stories in your past still nags at you as one that you just didn't have the opportunity or the time to give it its just deserve?
I think my answer to that one is more of an umbrella answer rather than a specific thing, because there's not one thing that sort of hovers over me years later in any weighty sort of way, like the story that got away. But I will say, in a general sense, much of the best sports journalism, I mentioned earlier, Bryant Gumbel and HBO Real Sports with all of his correspondents. 60 Minutes, one of the most successful news organizations in the history of the United States, at least until perhaps recently, had something called 60 Minutes Sports, which was brilliant, thoughtful, deep dive, well-researched sports journalism. I mentioned The Athletic. Those require a lot of time, a lot of resources, and that's what allows for the deeper and more thoughtful and more thorough dive into a topic, so that the writer or the broadcaster can have the maximum understanding of it, nuances and otherwise, and then communicate that to the audience. Most of my job descriptions over the years, Mike, have made it difficult, not impossible, there are exceptions, but difficult to do a lot of those deeper dives, just because, as we mentioned earlier in today's conversation, the evolution of the media world makes it an all-consuming sort of job description where you have daily deadlines, hourly deadlines. The manner in which people consume information today forces us to just hit them with rapid fire stuff and doesn't allow for as many deep dives. So I do occasionally wonder what I might have been able to accomplish if my job descriptions had allowed for more of that sort of thing. But The Athletic allowed me to do quite a bit of it. The old ACC Sports Journal allowed me to do quite a bit of it. The current North Carolina Sports Network allows me to do quite a bit of it. I just wrote about why are there so many bowls? Like we have all heard millions of people often critically ask, why are there so many bowls? How many people in the history of the world have actually researched the answer to the question? It is in my nature to hear millions of people ask a question, see almost nobody try to figure out the answer to that question, and then be the one with my logical attorney's brain and my journalism skills to actually figure out the answer to the question, which of course has to do with TV money and ESPN and the millions of people who watch bowl games, even when they're between obscure opponents, sometimes with 6-6 records, right? It has to do with the holidays. It has to do with downtime. It has to do with the popularity, rather, of football in our country, which has grown dramatically in our lifetimes. So there is an answer. But it required some deep dive research for me to come up with that answer. I value platforms that save some room for those deeper, more thoughtful dives. Not as many people read long-form journalism as was the case in the old days. But in addition to the rapid fire stuff that we do on our YouTube channel, there's a reason we have 60,000 YouTube subscribers, right? That's top 2% in the world in terms of subscribers, millions and millions of views for us. That's in part because we're giving people information in bite sizes, but I cherish the idea that there's still room for that deeper dive, thoughtful journalism because, those are some of my fondest memories of 4 decades in sports journalism.
You moved to North Carolina back in the late 1980s, and since then, boy, the press rooms, the press boxes themselves have really changed with the people who are going to cover the games. And that's just a natural, cyclical thing that happens. But when legends walk out the door, experience goes out the door. Why does experience matter when it comes to sports journalism, especially here in an area where sports is so much a part of the culture as it is in North Carolina?
I think experience matters because it's required for perspective. Allows you to see things in a broader way. There's so much overreaction to the last thing that happened, certainly among fans, but I think there's more of that overreaction to the last thing that happened, even in the media nowadays. And that gets back to needing, you need to feed the rage machine. You need to feed the engagement machine. You need to provoke reaction in some business models just to sustain that business model. But experience matters because you're able to provide a backdrop to either the last thing that happened or the last year's worth of things that happened. You're allowed to provide a backdrop to that I don't think many young journalists understand. Why is football such a large percentage of college sports TV deals? How many people even know that's the case? Why has the ACC fallen behind the Big Ten and the SEC financially? That's a big question. How many people know the multiple layers to the answer to that question? If you don't understand some of these big picture things, I enjoy the day-to-day grind. I enjoy watching the last game and sometimes talking about the last game or the most recent star freshman or the first-year head coach. I enjoy all that stuff. And a lot of young journalists are pretty good at reacting to those last things that happened. There are not as many young journalists or less experienced journalists who are good at seeing that bigger picture, understanding that backdrop, understanding how did we get here, understanding that at a certain school, a certain record is more impressive than the same record at this other school, right? If you don't know history, you don't understand the truly exceptional nature of what Curt Cignetti is doing at Indiana football. Even a young person can research that history and try to understand it. But the more you know, the better perspective you can provide to your audience, whether you're a writer or a broadcaster. And experience is fundamental to seeing that bigger picture, putting things in perspective. And that is absolutely a value to your listener, a value to your reader, because they lead busy lives. They're not studying and researching this stuff to the same degree that we are. And they're very unlikely to have that historical perspective and backdrop that we're able to provide. So just like the person who brings you your meal at the restaurant is providing a valuable service, and the person who checks you up at the doctor's office is providing a different type of valuable service, I think the best of sports journalism is providing a valuable service with their information, their entertainment, and their delivery of what's happening, but also why it's happening, how it's happening, and what's the rest of the backdrop that helps people understand what's happening.
You talk about perspective. I talk about patience because I know that from the world of intercollegiate athletics higher administration, that everything is not going to happen in an instance. It's not a jiffy pop culture or a microwave culture. It takes time for some of these things to happen. And that's one of the things that I've really seen over the last few years is that, and this happens with people of all experience levels, but I think it goes back to feeding that rage monster, David, that you talked about earlier, that we could be talking in December about a college basketball team and people are already passing judgment on whether or not a first-year coach is a success or a failure. And we're not even into ACC play in earnest yet. The college basketball season itself has gone from starting on October 15th to we're having games in October and November and December that are important games now instead of just the little sisters of the poor games. And people expecting football coaches in year one, it doesn't matter if you're at North Carolina or you're at Indiana or if you're at Southern Cal, man, it still takes some time to put these things together with the absolutely very rare exception of Florida State a few years ago. Or maybe what Indiana's doing right now. Let's see where Indiana is in 5 years. I mean, I think this day and age of the NIL, pay for play, transfer portal, all of the things that are going and swirling around, making this hurricane of a perfect storm around college sports is really going to be fun to watch. But I think people have to have patience sometimes because using today's standards, guys like Mike Krzyzewski and Dean Smith, two guys that you spent a lot of time interviewing, probably wouldn't have made it out of their first 5 years at either Duke or at North Carolina. But if not for guys like Bill Aycock and Bill Friday and Tom Butters keeping those guys around, people that had that perspective, that experience, and knew what really mattered in building a program.
Yeah, another example that comes to mind from my years covering the ACC is Frank Beamer at Virginia Tech.
Right.
I'd have to double check these exact numbers, but I believe in year 6 at Virginia Tech, Frank Beamer had 2 or 3 wins. Can you imagine today if you were in year 6 and you fell all the way down to 2 or 3 wins, you'd probably get fired. You're aware of the famous examples. Dean Smith was hung in effigy early in his career as the head coach of the Tar Heels. He goes on to be one of the greatest of all time. Mike Krzyzewski in the 1980s. There was literally a group called the Concerned Iron Dukes. The Iron Dukes are the booster organization there. They created the Concerned Iron Dukes because as of 1984, they weren't sure Coach K was the right guy for the job. Well, now he's a 5-time national champion and also on that Mount Rushmore of the history of college basketball coaches. Frank Beamer, of course, goes on to take Virginia Tech to the national championship game and is one of the most successful head coaches in modern college football history. So those are 3 great examples where patience did pay off. The money is different now. There are reasons that coaches are on shorter leashes, but some of the fundamentals don't really change. And if you have the right guy or the right woman in other contexts, it's worth seeing through the bad times to get to the good times. You just need competent, confident, capable, unafraid athletic directors and university presidents to hold off the angry mobs long enough for those great coaches to get through those down times.
I think you also have to know if you're an administrator, if you're an eagle or you're a chicken hawk. You either need to be an absolute eagle or you're not. And that's what you're finding out right now in this world of the transfer portal, because you can have a great quarterback at an East Carolina or an Appalachian State or maybe even a Charlotte, and they're gone. At that group of five level right now, you are an organ donor. That's something that Daniel Marshall, the former UConn star, told me when he was the head basketball coach at Central Connecticut State. And I was in town and hard hitting New Britain interviewing for that AD job. He took me over to the side after dinner and said, "Hey, man, you might not want to do this because you're in the Big Ten right now at Illinois. You come here, man, you're going to have to understand that we're an organ donor." And that was way back 10 years ago. I mean, how bad is it today? But hey, we're going to have an entire season on Timeout, the Tobacco Road Basketball Show, to talk about these and other issues. But before we close out this special edition of the show, David Glenn, I want to get some quick responses back from you. So, all right, no speeches, no footnotes. I give you the prompt. You give me, well, it's you, DG. So we're going to expand this out. You get 20 seconds. Kind of like the, 2/3 of a shot back in the day when the ACC had the old shot clock and they were trying that rule out for the first time, to give us your opinion or your reaction to these statements. So here goes. I give you the prompt, you react. Will the Atlantic Coast Conference be around for its 80th birthday in 2033?
Yes, but it probably will look a little bit different, meaning it will be missing a couple or a few key members by 2033.
One game to win, everything on the line, Dean Smith or Mike Krzyzewski, and why?
Thrilled with either one, to be clear, but I will take Coach K mainly because I thought Coach K was just a little bit better at adjusting on the fly, reading and understanding the nuances of the moment in a close game against a great team when needed.
Or Jay Wright.
I'll stick with Coach K. He does have 5 rings for a lot of good reasons, not to mention his gold medals with Team USA. I think I'm sticking with Coach K, man.
Coach K seems to be the end all be all, and that's why he's the all-time winningest coach. So
yeah, and none of those guys is a bad choice, just for the record.
And one last choice for you, Coach K or Greg Popovich?
I'm sticking with Coach K, man. Coach K is one of the smartest people I've ever interviewed in or out of sports. And I've been incredibly impressed by him in countless ways, but one of them is that he somehow managed to keep many of the best qualities of his mentor, Bob Knight, while largely avoiding many of the worst qualities of his mentor, Bob Knight. That says a lot about who Coach K is as a person and as a coach. I admire Dean Smith and others I've gotten to know personally and professionally, but Coach K is truly special, I think, even among many of the other great coaches of our time.
Which future of the sport worries you most, that of college basketball or of college football?
Neither worries me. I worry more about all the sports on campus that are not football and men's basketball. Because when push comes to shove in this money-saturated world where boosters are overextended, we all know that it's other sports that are going to head to the chopping block before football or men's basketball will.
Indiana is a basketball state. Texas is a football state. David Glenn, most of all, North Carolina is a state.
College basketball. We're a barbecue state. I love to brag about how we are one of the only states among our 50 that has great beaches and great lakes and great mountains. A lot of states have one or two of those things. Not many have all three, but we are a college basketball state. There is no place in the history of the world that has 3 schools located roughly 30-ish minutes apart by car that all have multiple national championships. NC State does, Duke does, Carolina does, and they're that close to each other right here in Triangle, USA. You can't say that about any other state. You can't say that about any other region. We are the center of the college basketball universe.
Can you imagine what it would be like if Wake Forest, North Carolina was still home to Wake Forest University? I mean, that blows my mind. I was just up there over the holiday break in Wake Forest, North Carolina, and it's now the Baptist Seminary, and they still have a lot of the buildings still around from when P. Head Walker was the coach on the football field for the Demon Deacons. But man, that was really something else, just the concentration And I think sometimes that concentration is a reason why we don't have more success in football. It really doesn't hurt basketball as much, but just that concentration of so many opportunities to play at major schools really has watered down or diluted the talent base that could have maybe focused at one or two schools. Instead, we have 7 Division I football programs here in the bold North State. Okay, let's keep on going right here. When the day comes that you step away from daily coverage of sports, what do you hope people say about David Glenn and the job that you've done?
Well, getting back to an earlier point, I do wonder and hope that fair-minded people, remember, I'm just stubborn enough that there's a subsection of our population that never learned how to be fair to people. And I will just die doing my best to not care at all what they think. You have to earn the right for me to care about what you think. The fair-minded people, I do care what they think. And I hope they appreciate that I emptied the effort bucket to try to be as informative and entertaining and thoughtful, especially about important topics, as anybody out there. And I celebrate those colleagues of mine who do great jobs in their own ways, but especially on my radio show and in platforms like this, there's a chance for your person to come out in addition for the journalist to come out. And I cherish some of the feedback we got over the years on our market research. When somebody says I'm a better person for having listened to this radio show, or I am a more informed citizen for having listened to this radio show, or he just described this in a way I had never thought of or heard before. Those types of things are important to me. But probably the bottom line is if in some way, large or small, I contributed to your enjoyment of sports, that makes me happy. If in some way, large or small, I made your drive to pick up the kids and you turned on my radio show a more pleasant journey, that's important to me. When people say I became a better person or I became a smarter person or I became a more informed citizen or those bigger over the top things, I mean, I cherish those sorts of things, but I realize for most people, we're just a tiny planet in their universe. And I hope I, as that tiny planet, made their world a little bit better place, a more informed place, a more fun place, a more entertaining place for however long they might have followed my career. Need insurance? Go to a team that's got your back. The Lawson Insurance Group, run by the Lawson brothers, right here in Raleigh. They deliver real service, smart protection, and the kind of trust that's hard to find these days. Find them online by searching Lawson Insurance Group. That's Lawson, Lawson Insurance Group, and tell them DG sent you.
Are you juggling so many roles that none of them feel like you anymore? At Organize for Success, we help busy, multi-passionate leaders bring harmony back to every layer of life. Work, side projects, family, friends, even your passions and hobbies. For more than a decade, productivity expert Emily Parks has helped hundreds of clients clarify what truly matters and build the tools, systems, and habits to finally take action. If you're tired of feeling behind, visit organizeforsuccess.com and schedule your complimentary call today. Organize for Success. Get clear, get supported, get your time back.
What's the favorite sporting venue that you have been to and enjoyed a game in North Carolina, regardless of any sport? What event or venue really does speak to you in a very meaningful way?
I'd say it's Cameron Indoor Stadium with Duke basketball. I grew up in the Philadelphia area, and there's a building up there called the Palestra. Now, even though Philadelphia is an overwhelmingly pro-sports-driven city, right? They're talking about the Eagles in the NFL, the Phillies in Major League Baseball. They're only occasionally talking about college sports. And one of the reasons I decided to make the South my home is that I like our blend here in North Carolina, and with our North Carolina Sports Network, I think we have the ideal blend of pro sports and college sports. Whereas Philly was much more pro sports. But I bring up Philly and the Palestra because it allowed me at a young age to fall in love with college basketball long before I knew I was going to be this 20-year-old kid, 20 years old, down the street from Jim State, Mike Duke, and Dean Smith at Carolina. I mean, you want to talk about doubling down on my love and appreciation for college basketball. But I went from seeing some games at the Palestra. My dad's a St. Joe's graduate. The Big Five is a big thing in college basketball up in Philly. Long before I had any idea this would even be a career, I appreciated the atmosphere of college hoops. And it turns out that Cameron Indoor Stadium was based in part on and built, 100+ years ago at this point, right? Was based in part on some of the famous arenas of the North, including the Palestra in Philadelphia. So when I sit in Cameron Indoor Stadium, I can remember decades of covering Mike Krzyzewski and interviewing him dozens of times, often one-on-one in compelling conversations. I can remember seeing, former President Barack Obama and other celebrities there enjoying games. I watched the legends of college basketball with my own eyes from press row, from Grant Hill and Christian Laettner and Bobby Hurley, all the way through J.J. Redick, and now in more recent times, Cooper Flagg, and now Cameron Boozer, right? I mean, I had a front row seat for a lot of that in this smaller than usual building by college basketball's modern standards that can make you flash back to what life might have been like 100 years ago or 50 years ago when I'm a young boy watching a game at the Palestra in Philly and starting to fall in love with college basketball. All of those elements, the Cameron crazies, man. Like, I've gone from the early years of covering games at Cameron where truly face paint had not yet evolved to the point that it was easy to wash out of your clothes. So you'd leave there wondering whether you just ruined a nice jacket that you had as a 21-year-old that you couldn't afford to replace. So I'm glad that face paint has evolved to where it's much more easily washable, even though I can afford a new jacket now in a way I could not have back then. All of that, seeing so many Duke Carolina games, right? I mean, holy cow. In the world of sports, I don't care if you think some international soccer rivalry is number one or Yankees Red Sox in American baseball is number one. Somewhere in the conversation is Duke Carolina men's basketball. And I've seen it dozens of times at the Smith Center, and I've seen it dozens of times at Cameron Indoor Stadium. But that combination of elements makes me put Cameron Indoor Stadium number one on my North Carolina venue list. It's hard to do much better than what you see at Cameron, especially for a big game.
The North Carolina Port Council is the foundational partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. So we had this DG special question for you now. Eastern North Carolina barbecue or Western North Carolina barbecue, David? And remember, I'm from the western part of the state. No pressure.
And I am not allowed to sit on the fence. I am not allowed to break into any legalese with this answer.
No.
I have to be honest. Eastern is my answer to the question. I just like that vinegar base. I do like both, and I'm not kidding when I say that, but I've probably had more Eastern style. I've even had some South Carolina style. I've had Texas style. I've had Missouri style or Kansas style. I like Eastern North Carolina first. I like Western North Carolina second, and I like all the rest of those third, fourth, fifth, and sixth.
Good answer. I will tell you, I'm from the western part of the state, and I can't stand anything that has ketchup in it.
All right.
So I'm a whole hog. I'm just going to go there. I'll just go straight North Carolina whole hog for you. And then finally, we just crossed over into the new year. The ACC basketball season is just underway. We're about to crown a college football champion coming up. Down the line, we have a great college baseball season coming to North Carolina. We have the Big Rock fishing tournament down in Morehead City that is coming up. So many great things here in the state of North Carolina. What are you, David Glenn, most looking forward to in the year 2026?
I look forward to telling the great stories of where human beings get to strut their stuff in the sports setting. I mean, we are fascinated with sports in part because we love the history of this school or this program or this coach or this athlete. But sports to me is just a platform for human beings to strut their stuff, for competition to bring out the best or worst in people. And in our state, at the professional level, we have the NFL and the NBA and NASCAR and the National Hockey League. And the Carolina Hurricanes have become one of the best franchises in the NHL, and the Carolina Panthers are back in the playoffs this year. And we have professional golf events, and we have professional tennis events, and we have professional fishing events. I mean, we are a diverse, effervescent, multi-talented state with something interesting essentially everywhere in every corner of the North Carolina universe. And it's pro, it's college, it's high school, as you and I not long ago traveled the state to go to all the NCHSAA football championship games. We love it all. And we love telling these stories. And we love telling it in thoughtful, intelligent, well-informed, fair, accurate, and hopefully entertaining ways. So I don't even always know what a certain calendar year has waiting for us. I just know that the state of North Carolina never runs out of great sports-related stories to tell, and I consider it a privilege to be alongside you as we continue our work at the North Carolina Sports Network.
Man, this has been a lot of fun. Not only do we go into a new year, but now we get a new understanding of you and your background. Coming up, we're going to do this same type of show with Carrie Keating. And then coming up later, we will have our first real true edition of Time Out, the Tobacco Road basketball show coming up in a very short period of time. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Basketball, man, it's right here. We got football out of the way. It's basketball season. And as you say, North Carolina is a bold basketball state. David Glenn, thanks a lot for your time. We look forward to seeing you on down the highways and byways of this bold North state over the next few months as we count down to the ACC tournament that's coming up in the Queen City of Charlotte there in the second week of March. We'll see you there.
Great to be with you, my friend. Thanks to everybody for being with us today on this show, and best wishes to everybody throughout 2026.
This is the North Carolina Sports Network. From the high country to the Outer Banks, on courts, fields, and fairways, we tell the stories of the bold North State. Follow us on social media at the NC Sports Net. We're the exclusive home of The David Glenn Show, coach-driven analysis of football and basketball. A look at the past with This Was Then, Inside NIL with Court Vision, the North Carolina Sports Awards, aka the Pineys, and the Old North State Tailgate, where we are on the ground at North Carolina's top events. Our foundational partner is NC Pork, raising the bacon, raising the bar. Telling the stories of the bold North State. Experience matters. This is NCSN, the North Carolina Sports Network.